Cub trembles on a swing set, a preschooler's gesture, changed wildlife law forever. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rusty swing set creaked under the gentle afternoon breeze, its chains swaying lazily in the golden light that filtered through the maple trees surrounding Oak Ridge Park. Lily Morgan, a 4-year-old with curly auburn hair and bright green eyes, sat in the sandbox nearby, her small hands patiently building a castle with determined focus. Her mother, Eleanor, chatted with neighbors near the park entrance, occasionally glancing toward her daughter with a watchful eye. No one noticed the small black bear cub that had wandered from the woods beyond the playground. The cub, barely 5 months old with soft fur and curious eyes, had been separated from its mother while foraging for berries. Confused and hungry, it followed the scent of discarded snacks to the playground, where the strange metal structure with hanging seats caught its attention. The cub sniffed cautiously at the swing set, its small ears twitching at every sound. With clumsy determination, it managed to climb onto the lowest swing, its tiny paws gripping the rubber seat as it balanced precariously. The swing began to sway, causing the cub to tremble with uncertainty. It whimpered softly, too frightened to jump down but too curious to retreat. At the edge of the park, 3 teenagers lounged under a tree, their bored expressions brightening as they spotted the unusual scene. Jacob Bennett, the tallest of the group with a faded black hoodie and a reputation for trouble, nudged his friends and pointed toward the swing set. "Check it out," he whispered, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "That's the weirdest thing I've seen all year." His friends, Connor Adams and Michael Hayes, followed his gaze, their eyes widening at the sight of the trembling cub. Connor, his blond hair falling into his eyes, laughed nervously. "We should call animal control or something, right?" Jacob scoffed, already rising to his feet. "Where's the fun in that? Come on, when are we ever going to get a chance to mess with a bear?" The 3 boys moved silently toward the swing set, their shadows stretching across the playground. The cub, sensing their approach, trembled more violently, its dark eyes darting around for escape. It released a pitiful whine that was carried away by the breeze before anyone could hear. Lily looked up from her sandcastle, her gaze drawn to the unusual sight. She tilted her head curiously, watching as the 3 older boys approached the swing set where something small and furry clung desperately to the seat. Her small brow furrowed with concern as she saw the creature shaking. "Look at it, trying to swing," Jacob laughed, reaching the playground first. "Bet it doesn't know how to pump its legs." Michael hung back slightly, uncertainty flashing across his face. "Maybe we should leave it alone. What if its mom is nearby?" "Don't be such a baby," Jacob replied, picking up a small pebble from the ground. "Bears are supposed to be scared of humans. We're just helping it learn." He tossed the pebble toward the cub, hitting the chain of the swing and causing it to jerk suddenly. The cub yelped in terror, its tiny claws scraping against the rubber as it struggled to hold on. Connor laughed, emboldened by Jacob's actions, and gave the swing a gentle push. The cub's frightened eyes grew wider as the ground moved beneath it, its small body swaying helplessly. It released another cry, louder this time, but still drowned out by the boys' laughter. Lily stood up, brushing sand from her pink overalls. Something deep inside her young heart recognized the sound of fear. The small creature on the swing was scared, and the big boys were making it worse. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to frighten something so small and helpless. Her mother had always taught her to be kind to animals. They had rescued a baby bird that had fallen from its nest last spring, keeping it safe until its mother returned. Lily remembered how careful they had been, how important it was to protect creatures smaller than herself. With determination beyond her years, Lily took a step toward the swing set, her tiny sneakers leaving footprints in the sand. The distance between her and the frightened cub seemed enormous to her 4-year-old perspective, but something pulled her forward, an instinct to help that outweighed her natural caution. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground as the situation balanced on a knife's edge. The mother bear, somewhere in the woods beyond, had finally noticed her cub's absence. The teenagers, unaware of the danger they were courting, continued to torment the frightened animal, and Lily, small but resolute, moved steadily toward a confrontation that would change everything. No one in the park that day could have predicted how the next few moments would unfold, how a child's compassion would stand against cruelty, how a mother's protective instinct would be tested in unexpected ways, or how this chance encounter between human and wildlife would ripple outward to change laws and hearts forever. What no one at Oak Ridge Park realized was that they weren't alone that afternoon. Seated on a weathered bench, partially concealed by overgrown rhododendron bushes, sat Avery Johnson, a wildlife photographer whose patience had been rewarded in ways she never expected. She had come to the park hoping to capture images of the red-tailed hawks that nested in the tall pines at the forest edge. Instead, her telephoto lens was now focused on something far more compelling and disturbing. Avery's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her camera settings, her breath catching in her throat. Through her viewfinder, she could see every detail: the cub's frightened eyes, the teen's cruel smiles, and the determined little girl moving toward the confrontation. Avery was 34, with crow's feet beginning to form around her eyes from years of squinting into her viewfinder in all weather conditions. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the forest green jacket she wore helped her blend into the surroundings. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, the shutter of her camera clicking rapidly as she documented the unfolding scene. For 3 years, Avery had been working on a documentary about human-wildlife interactions in suburban environments, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She lowered her camera for a moment, debating whether to intervene. The safety of both the child and the cub concerned her deeply. As a wildlife expert, she knew how unpredictable bears could become when frightened, even cubs. But something held her back. The photographer in her wanted to document, to capture truth rather than interfere with it. And the trained naturalist in her recognized that shouting or running toward the scene might only escalate the danger. Through her lens, she watched as the smallest teen, Michael, shifted uncomfortably, clearly conflicted about their actions. "Jacob, seriously, this isn't funny anymore. That thing is terrified." "Oh, come on," Jacob replied, his voice carrying across the playground. "It's not like we're hurting it. We're just having some fun." Connor, seeking to impress Jacob, picked up another pebble and bounced it off the metal frame of the swing set, making a sharp, clanging sound that caused the cub to jerk in panic. Its small paws slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment it dangled precariously from the swing by one paw before managing to pull itself back up. Avery gasped, her finger instinctively pressing the shutter. This documentation could be crucial, evidence of wildlife harassment that the local ranger station had been trying to address for months. Reports of teenagers tormenting animals in the woods had increased, but without proof, authorities had been unable to take action. Meanwhile, deeper in the woods, the mother bear was growing increasingly frantic. She was a young mother, only 3 years old, and this was her first cub. The separation had occurred when a sudden downpour had washed away their scent trail earlier that morning. For hours, she had been searching, her powerful nose testing the air for any trace of her baby. Finally, a faint, familiar scent caught her attention, mixed with unfamiliar human smells that triggered her protective instincts. The mother bear moved cautiously toward the edge of the forest, her massive form slipping silently between the trees despite her size. She paused at the tree line, hidden by underbrush, her keen eyes scanning the open space beyond. What she saw made her muscles tense and a low rumble build in her chest. Back at the playground, Lily had covered half the distance to the swing set, her tiny legs carrying her with surprising determination. Her mother still hadn't noticed, engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Peterson about the upcoming school fundraiser. The other parents present were equally distracted, their attention turned toward their own children or their phones. "Be brave like Daddy taught you," Lily whispered to herself, remembering how her father, before his deployment overseas with the military 6 months ago, had encouraged her to stand up for what was right, even when it was scary. The memory of his gentle voice gave her courage as she approached the teenagers who seemed as tall as giants from her perspective. Jacob had now moved behind the swing and was pushing it with increasing force, causing the cub to sway wildly. The animal's claws scraped desperately against the rubber seat, leaving thin marks as it tried to hold on. Its cries had transformed from whimpers to frightened yelps that pierced the afternoon air. "Stop it," Lily said as she reached the edge of the playground, her voice barely audible over the teenager's laughter. She clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, tightly against her chest, drawing courage from its familiar presence. None of the boys heard her first attempt. Connor had joined Jacob behind the swing, both of them pushing now while Michael stood to the side, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I said, stop it!" Lily shouted, with all the force her small lungs could muster, her voice cracking with emotion. This time, the boys turned, momentarily startled by the high-pitched command. Jacob recovered quickly, his surprise turning to amusement. "Well, look who it is, the playground police. What's wrong, little girl? You want to turn on the swing?" Connor sniggered, but Michael took a step back, shame washing over his face as he saw the genuine distress in the child's eyes. "You're being mean," Lily declared, her bottom lip trembling slightly even as she stood her ground. "That baby is scared. You need to stop." Through her camera lens, Avery captured the incredible moment. A tiny child confronting boys 3 times her size, standing up for a frightened wild animal with nothing but a stuffed bear clutched in her arms. The contrast was both heart-wrenching and powerful, but even as she documented the scene, alarm bells rang in her mind. The situation was escalating too quickly, and she knew she couldn't remain a passive observer much longer. What Avery couldn't see from her position was the dark shape moving through the underbrush at the forest edge, the mother bear advancing with silent determination, her every muscle tense and ready to defend her cub. In the branches above the approaching mother bear, a crow noticed the large predator and let out a warning call that echoed through the trees. The harsh sound momentarily drew Michael's attention toward the forest, but the dense foliage concealed the approaching danger. He felt a prickle of unease run down his spine, an ancient instinct warning of a threat his conscious mind couldn't yet perceive. "Guys," he said, his voice dropping to a nervous whisper, "maybe we should go. This doesn't feel right." Jacob rolled his eyes, dismissing his friend's concern. "Don't be such a wimp. It's just a baby bear and a little kid. What's the worst that could happen?" Those words would soon be answered in ways none of them could have imagined. Lily's small hands trembled, but her voice remained strong as she took another step forward. The distance between herself and the swing set had narrowed to just a few yards. The cub's frightened eyes met hers, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or a desperate plea for help that transcended the barriers between species. "He's just a baby," Lily insisted, her face flushing with emotion. "My daddy says we have to protect babies, not hurt them." Jacob's amusement faded, replaced by irritation at being lectured by a 4-year-old. "Your daddy isn't here, is he?" he said, his tone hardening. "And it's just a stupid bear. They're dangerous. We're teaching it to stay away from people." "That's not true," Lily replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "You're just being bullies. My mommy says bullies are people who make themselves feel big by making others feel small." Connor snorted, but Michael shifted uncomfortably, the child's words hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. His grandfather was a park ranger, and he'd grown up learning about wildlife. He knew what they were doing was wrong, illegal even. Yet he'd gone along with it, afraid of losing Jacob's friendship. "Jacob," Michael said, finding his voice at last. "The kid's right. This is messed up. Let's just go before someone calls the cops or something." "Seriously?" Jacob turned on his friend, his face darkening with anger. "You're taking her side? What are you, 5 years old?" While the teenagers argued, Lily seized the opportunity to move closer to the swing. The cub watched her approach, its initial fear giving way to a fragile hope as it sensed something different in this small human, an absence of the threat it felt from the others. Avery's camera continued to capture each moment, but her concern was growing by the second. Through her telephoto lens, she spotted movement at the forest edge that made her blood run cold, the unmistakable form of an adult black bear emerging partially from the trees. The mother was still partially concealed by underbrush, assessing the situation before committing to the open ground, but her presence changed everything. "Oh, God," Avery whispered, lowering her camera and rising from the bench. She had to intervene now before tragedy struck. She began moving quickly but cautiously toward the playground, trying not to make sudden movements that might trigger the mother bear to cheigh. At the same moment, Eleanor Morgan finally glanced toward the sandbox where she expected to find her daughter playing contentedly. The empty patch of sand made her heart skip a beat. Her eyes darted around the playground until she spotted Lily's pink overalls near the swing set, and the furry creature balanced precariously on the swing. "Lily!" she gasped, her conversation forgotten as maternal panic surged through her. She began running toward her daughter, drawing the attention of other parents who had been oblivious to the unfolding drama. The multiple rapid movements, Avery approaching from one direction, Eleanor from another, and the teenagers still gathered around the swing, created a chaotic scene that the mother bear perceived as an increasing threat to her cub. She let out a warning huff, a sound that carried across the park and froze everyone in their tracks. Everyone except Lily. The little girl had reached the swing set now, standing directly before the frightened cub. With the instinctive gentleness children often show toward animals, she reached out a small hand, palm up, the way her mother had taught her to approach their neighbor's nervous dog. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't hurt you anymore. I promise." The cub, exhausted from fear and the effort of clinging to the swing, looked at the small human with confusion. This one made no loud noises, threw no stones, caused no pain. Its sensitive nose detected the different emotional state, an absence of the aggressive chemicals that had poured from the older humans. In a moment that Avery's camera captured perfectly, a moment that would later be described as miraculous, the cub cautiously extended a paw toward Lily's outstretched hand. Then several things happened at once. Jacob, furious at being defied and embarrassed in front of his friends, lunged forward and gave the swing one final hard push. "This is stupid," he spat. The swing flew forward, the sudden movement breaking the delicate connection forming between Lily and the cub. The frightened animal lost its grip and tumbled through the air with a terrified cry. Without hesitation, Lily stepped forward and caught the falling cub against her chest, much as she would cradle her teddy bear. The impact knocked her backward onto the soft playground mulch. The cub clutched protectively in her small arms. The mother bear heard her cub's cry and saw it falling. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, she burst from the forest edge and charged toward the playground. Eleanor screamed her daughter's name, her voice joining the confused shouts of other parents who had finally noticed the danger. The teenagers scattered, Jacob and Connor sprinting toward the park entrance while Michael stood frozen in horror at what they had caused. Avery, closest to the scene, made a split-second decision that would later be scrutinized by experts and media alike. Instead of running away from the charging bear, she ran toward Lily and the cub, her camera still gripped tightly in one hand. If she couldn't prevent what was about to happen, she could at least document it, provide evidence, context, truth. Time seemed to slow as the massive mother bear closed the distance to the playground, her powerful muscles propelling her across the open ground with terrifying speed. Parents grabbed their children and fled, panic spreading through the park like wildfire. Eleanor's desperate attempts to reach her daughter were blocked by the playground equipment and the surging crowd of fleeing families. Lily, still on the ground with the cub in her arms, looked up to see the adult bear charging directly toward her. But instead of fear, her face showed only calm acceptance. With gentle hands, she released the cub, setting it carefully on the ground before her. "Go to your mommy," she whispered, giving it a small, encouraging nudge. "She misses you." The cub, freed from the terrifying swing and the cruel teenagers, looked at Lily for one more moment, before scampering toward its approaching mother. Their reunion occurred just yards from where Lily still sat on the ground, the massive adult bear coming to a halt as her cub reached her. What happened next would be debated by wildlife experts for years to come. The mother bear, with her cub now safely between her front legs, did not immediately retreat to the forest. Instead, she raised her head and looked directly at the small human child who had protected her baby. Their eyes met across the divide of species, predator and potential prey, in a moment of connection that transcended the natural order. Avery, who had reached Lily's side and placed herself partially between the child and the bear, expected to feel teeth and claws at any moment. Instead, she witnessed something extraordinary through the viewfinder of her raised camera. The mother bear made a soft chuffing sound to her cub, gathering it closer with gentle movements of her powerful legs. Then, still maintaining eye contact with Lily, she rose slightly on her hind legs, not in the aggressive posture of a threatened bear, but in what almost appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement. For 3 breathless seconds, the bear remained in this position before dropping back to all fours and turning toward the forest, her cub scampering alongside her. With no further sound, the bears disappeared into the underbrush, leaving behind a playground empty of everything except scattered toys, abandoned by fleeing families. In the sudden silence, Lily turned her face up to Avery, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. She said, "Thank you," the child whispered with absolute conviction. Avery, her hand still shaking from adrenaline, could only nod. She had photographed wildlife around the world for 15 years, but never had she witnessed anything like what had just occurred. As a scientist, she knew better than to anthropomorphize animal behavior, and yet the bear's actions defied conventional explanation. Eleanor finally broke through the playground equipment and ran to her daughter, scooping her up in a crushing embrace, tears streaming down her face. "Lily, oh my God, Lily, are you hurt? Did it touch you? We need to get you to a hospital." "I'm okay, Mommy," Lily said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. The baby was scared, but I helped him find his mommy again. As emergency sirens wailed in the distance, someone had called 911 during the chaos. Michael approached hesitantly, his face pale with shock and remorse. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "This is our fault. We were just being stupid and—" He stopped, overwhelmed by the potential consequences of their actions. "Is she okay? The little girl?" Avery, who had lowered her camera and was checking Lily for injuries, looked up at the teenager with a mixture of anger and understanding. "She's unharmed, physically at least. No thanks to you and your friends." Michael's shoulders slumped under the weight of her rightful condemnation. "I know," he whispered. "I should have stopped them. I knew it was wrong from the beginning." "Yes, you should have," Avery agreed, her tone softening slightly as she recognized genuine remorse in his eyes. "But what matters now is what you do next." Before Michael could respond, park rangers and police cruisers pulled up to the park entrance, followed closely by an animal control vehicle. The authorities had responded to reports of a bear attack, prepared for the worst. What they found instead was a shaken but unharmed child, a tearfully grateful mother, a wildlife photographer with extraordinary documentation of the incident, and one remorseful teenager ready to tell the truth. None of them could have predicted how this strange confluence of events, a frightened cub on a swing set, a brave preschooler's intervention, a photographer's presence, and a mother bear's unexpected restraint, would reverberate far beyond Oak Ridge Park in the days and weeks to come. The story was just beginning. By sunset, the incident at Oak Ridge Park had transformed from a local emergency into a media sensation. Police had taken statements from witnesses, park rangers had established a temporary perimeter around the area, and Avery Johnson had reluctantly shared her photographs with authorities to help them understand exactly what had transpired. Eleanor sat in the back of an ambulance with Lily, who had been checked by paramedics and pronounced physically unharmed. The child seemed remarkably calm, cradling her teddy bear and answering questions with a straightforward clarity that surprised the adults around her. "The baby bear was scared," she explained patiently to a ranger for the third time. "The big boys were being mean to him. I just wanted to help him find his mommy." Ranger Thomas Wilkins, a veteran wildlife officer with 20 years of experience, crouched down to Lily's eye level. Unlike some of his colleagues who viewed the situation primarily as a dangerous wildlife encounter, Thomas sensed there was something profound in the child's experience. "That was very brave of you, Lily," he said gently, "but also very dangerous. Bears are wild animals and mothers are very protective of their cubs." Lily nodded solemnly. "I know. My mommy is protective of me too. That's why the bear mommy understood. She saw I was helping her baby." The ranger exchanged glances with Eleanor, who was still visibly shaken. "Mrs. Morgan, we'd like to follow up with you tomorrow, if that's all right. The department will need to issue a formal report about this incident." Eleanor nodded, pulling Lily closer. "Of course, whatever you need. I just want to take my daughter home now." Across the park, Michael Hayes sat in the back of a police cruiser, not under arrest but separated from the chaos while officers took his statement. He had confessed everything: how Jacob had initiated the harassment of the cub, how Connor had joined in, and how he himself had failed to stop it despite knowing better. "They took off when the mother bear appeared," he explained, his voice hollow with shame. "Jacob grabbed Connor's arm and they just ran. I couldn't move. I kept thinking about the little girl, about what we'd done." Officer Ramirez made notes, her expression carefully neutral. "Do you know where your friends might have gone?" Michael nodded miserably. "Probably to Jacob's house. His parents are away for the weekend." He hesitated, then added, "Jacob's been in trouble before. For other things, he likes hurting things. I should never have gone along with it." "No," Officer Ramirez agreed. "You shouldn't have. But coming forward now was the right thing to do." Meanwhile, Avery Johnson was surrounded by park officials, police officers, and wildlife management personnel, all eager to see her photographs and hear her account. She felt torn between her instinct to protect her work and the recognition that her documentation could be crucial to understanding what had happened. "I've never witnessed anything like it," she explained, scrolling through images on her camera's display screen. "I've documented bear behavior in Alaska, Yellowstone, and across Canada, and this interaction defied everything we typically understand about black bear responses to humans." The group leaned in as she reached the climactic images. The mother bear's posture as she faced Lily, the almost ceremonial way she had risen slightly on her hind legs before retreating with her cub. "In your professional opinion, was the bear threatening the child?" asked Dr. Harriet Chen, the county's wildlife management director who had been called to the scene. Avery shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. A threatening black bear would have displayed different posture entirely. Ears back, teeth exposed, vocalizing. This was something else." "Something else isn't very scientific, Miss Johnson," Dr. Chen remarked with a skeptical raise of her eyebrow. "Neither is what I witnessed," Avery replied evenly. "But the evidence is right here." She gestured to her camera. The bear had every opportunity to attack. Instead, it retrieved its cub and withdrew, and that moment of eye contact with the child. She trailed off, aware that putting into words what she had witnessed would sound like anthropomorphizing to her scientific colleagues. Yet the images told a story that challenged conventional understanding. As night fell, the immediate crisis had passed, but the story continued to spread. Local news vans had arrived, and reporters were already piecing together accounts from witnesses who had fled the park. Headlines were being drafted, most sensationalizing the event. "Child survives bear encounter," "Near tragedy at Oak Ridge Park," "Wildlife terror in suburban park." None of them captured the truth of what had really happened. Not yet. In the darkness of the surrounding forest, the mother bear and her cub had traveled over a mile, putting distance between themselves and the human encounter. In a small clearing, they finally rested, the cub nursing hungrily after its traumatic day. The mother remained alert, her keen senses monitoring the forest around them. Although she couldn't understand the human world or the ripples spreading from the day's events, her actions had set in motion changes that would eventually affect her own kind. Back in town, Jacob and Connor had indeed gone to Jacob's empty house, where they huddled in the basement recreation room, their earlier bravado replaced by panic. "They're going to know it was us," Connor said, pacing nervously. "Michael's probably already told them everything." Jacob, sprawled on the couch with forced casualness, shrugged. "So what? It's not like we hurt the stupid bear. We were just having some fun. Nobody got hurt. A little girl could have been killed." Connor exploded, his face flushed. "Did you see that mother bear? It was huge, and it was charging right at her." "But nothing happened," Jacob insisted, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "The bear just took its cub and left. It's not our fault some dumb kid decided to play hero." Connor stopped pacing and stared at his friend, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You really don't get it, do you? You don't care about anyone but yourself." Before Jacob could respond, Connor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. His mother's name flashed on the screen. With a last disgusted look at Jacob, he answered and moved to the far corner of the room. Mom? Yeah, I'm at Jacob's. No, I'm fine. I wasn't at the... He paused, listening, his face growing pale. How did you... The news already? No, Another pause, longer this time. Okay, I'll tell you everything when you get here. I'm sorry. He ended the call and turned to Jacob, his earlier defiance replaced by resignation. My mom's coming to get me. The story's already on the news and someone recognized us from the park. She says the police will probably want to talk to us. Jacob finally sat up straight, his facade of indifference cracking. What? That's bullshit. We didn't do anything illegal. Actually, Connor said quietly, I think we did. My dad's always talking about wildlife harassment laws. They're pretty serious. For the first time, real fear showed in Jacob's eyes as the potential consequences of their actions began to sink in. Across town, in the modest apartment she shared with her daughter, Eleanor Morgan sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her child sleep peacefully despite the day's trauma. The television in the living room was tuned to the local news, the volume turned low so as not to disturb Lily's rest. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her husband, Staff Sergeant David Morgan, currently stationed overseas. The time difference meant he was just starting his day as hers was ending. Just saw something about a bear incident at Oak Ridge Park. Are you and Lily okay? Eleanor's fingers trembled as she typed a response, unsure how to explain what had happened without causing him panic. Before she could finish, her phone rang. David calling despite the expensive international rates. "El, are you there? Is Lily all right?" His voice was tight with concern. "We're fine," Eleanor whispered, moving away from Lily's bedroom. "It's complicated. Lily's sleeping now. She's completely unharmed. The news here is saying a child confronted a bear. Please tell me that wasn't our daughter." Eleanor took a deep breath. "It was, but it's not what you think. She did something incredible, David. Something I still can't quite believe." As she recounted the day's events to her husband, Eleanor realized that the media portrayal had indeed missed the heart of the story. They had focused on the danger, the near tragedy, the what-ifs. None had captured what Lily had done, the pure, instinctive compassion that had possibly saved not only the cub, but herself and others at the park. "That's our girl," David said when she finished, his voice thick with emotion and pride, despite his lingering fear. "Brave, just like her mother." "Brave like her father," Eleanor countered, wiping away tears. "I miss you so much, David. I wish you were here." "Me too, but I'll be home in 3 weeks. Tell Lily I'm proud of her, and to never, ever do anything like that again." Eleanor laughed softly, the sound carrying the release of tension she'd been holding all evening. "I will. I love you. Love you both. Stay safe." As she ended the call, Eleanor noticed a notification from a local news app, another update about the Oak Ridge Park bear incident. With a sigh, she clicked on it, expecting more sensationalism. Instead, she found herself looking at one of Avery Johnson's photographs. It showed Lily standing before the swing set, her tiny figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun as she confronted the teenagers. The headline read, "Courage in Small Packages. Local Child Stands Up for Wildlife." Perhaps someone was getting the story right after all. By morning, Avery Johnson's photographs had gone viral. What began as a local news story exploded across social media platforms, propelled by the powerful imagery of a 4-year-old girl standing up to teenage boys and, ultimately, facing down a black bear. Overnight, Lily Morgan became known as the Bear Whisperer, the Tiny Protector, and a dozen other nicknames bestowed by an enthralled public. The photographs that resonated most weren't those of the bear's charge or the dramatic evacuation of the park. Instead, people were captivated by two specific images. Lily confronting the teenagers with Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest, and the extraordinary moment when the mother bear stood briefly on her hind legs, making eye contact with Lily before retreating with her cub. In comment sections across the internet, debates raged. Wildlife experts offered competing interpretations of the bear's behavior, with traditionalists insisting it was mere coincidence. The bear had simply been startled by the commotion and chosen to retreat. Others, including some respected field researchers, suggested the possibility of something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or an unexpected interspecies understanding. Avery found herself besieged by media requests, her phone ringing constantly as morning broke. She'd spent most of the night carefully editing her photographs, preparing a sequence that told the true story of what had happened. As a documentary photographer, she felt a responsibility to ensure the narrative wasn't lost in sensationalism. She was particularly concerned about Lily and her family. The sudden attention could be overwhelming, especially for a child so young. Avery had experienced the double-edged sword of viral fame before, and she worried about the Morgan family's privacy and well-being. At the Morgan apartment, Eleanor was already dealing with the consequences of their sudden notoriety. Reporters had somehow obtained their address and were gathering outside the building. Her phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers, and her email inbox was filling with interview requests. Lily, blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding her, ate her breakfast cereal and watched cartoons, occasionally mentioning the baby bear, as if the previous day's events had been nothing more extraordinary than a play date at the park. "Mommy, can we go see if the baby bear is okay?" she asked, spooning the last of her Cheerios into her mouth. Eleanor sighed, brushing Lily's hair back from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. The baby bear is with its mother in the forest where they belong. We need to give them space now." But what if the mean boys find them again? The question made Eleanor's heart ache. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that her simple act of kindness had become the center of a media frenzy, that the mean boys were now facing potential legal consequences, that wildlife officials were monitoring the forest edge to ensure the bears remained away from human habitation? "The park rangers are making sure no one bothers them," she said instead, choosing simplicity. "And guess what? Your dad called last night after you were asleep. He saw what happened on the news all the way across the ocean, and he's very proud of you." Lily's face lit up. "Daddy saw me help the baby bear?" "He sure did. But he also wants you to remember to be careful around wild animals. They can be dangerous, even when they're scared." The child nodded solemnly, accepting the gentle warning. "I know, but the mommy bear wasn't mad at me. She was just worried about her baby, like you worry about me." Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang again. This time, it was a number she recognized. Ranger Thomas Wilkins from the previous evening. "Mrs. Morgan, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to check on Lily and give you some information. The situation has escalated since last night." Eleanor moved to the kitchen, lowering her voice. "I've noticed. There are reporters outside our building. How did they get our address?" "I'm sorry about that. The department certainly didn't release any personal information, but in the age of social media," he sighed, "that's actually part of why I'm calling. The department is holding a press conference at noon to address public concerns about the bears and the safety of the park. We were hoping you and Lily might attend." "A press conference? Tom, she's 4 years old. I don't want to subject her to that kind of scrutiny." "I understand completely, but we're concerned about the narrative forming online. Some are calling for the bears to be relocated or even euthanized as a public safety measure. Others are using this incident to push for stricter wildlife harassment laws. Your daughter's experience is at the center of it all, and her perspective and yours could help shape the outcome. Eleanor glanced at Lily, who was now contentedly drawing pictures at the coffee table, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around her. I need to think about it. This is all happening too fast. Of course. The press conference is at the ranger station at noon. If you decide to come, we'll have a private entrance for you to avoid the media crush. And I promise Lily won't have to speak directly to the press if you don't want her to. After ending the call, Eleanor sat heavily on a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the situation. She needed advice, perspective, someone to help her navigate these unfamiliar waters. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Morgan, this is Avery Johnson, the wildlife photographer from the park yesterday. I understand you're probably being inundated with messages right now, but I'd like to help if I can. I've been through media situations like this before, and might be able to offer some guidance. No pressure, just reaching out as someone who witnessed what actually happened. Here if you need me. Eleanor stared at the message for a long moment, then made a decision. She needed allies in this strange new reality, and Avery Johnson had been there. She had seen the truth. Across town, Jacob Bennett and Connor Adams sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs at the police station, their parents beside them. Officer Ramirez explained the situation in clear, uncompromising terms. Wildlife harassment is a serious offense in this state, especially involving protected species like black bears. The incident was documented extensively, and we have multiple witness statements, including a full confession from Michael Hayes. Jacob's father, a prominent local businessman, leaned forward aggressively. They're teenagers. They made a stupid mistake. No one was hurt. That's not entirely accurate, Mr. Bennett, Officer Ramirez replied coolly. We were extremely fortunate that no one was physically injured, but that outcome was despite your son's actions, not because of them. And there are consequences for those actions. She turned to the teenagers. You have some difficult choices ahead. The wildlife authorities are considering pressing charges under state conservation laws. However, they're also discussing alternative resolutions that might be more educational. Connor, who had barely spoken since arriving, finally looked up. What kind of alternatives? A comprehensive community service program focused on wildlife conservation, significant hours, educational components, and public accountability. It wouldn't eliminate consequences, but it might avoid more severe legal penalties. Jacob slumped in his chair, sullen and defensive, but Connor sat straighter. I want that option, he said, ignoring Jacob's glare. I want to make this right. Jacob's father began to protest, but Officer Ramirez cut him off. Mr. Bennett, I suggest you discuss this privately with your son and your attorney. The Wildlife Division will make their final decision by tomorrow morning. I should mention that the evidence in this case is particularly compelling, and public interest is extremely high. As if to emphasize her point, she turned her computer monitor to show them a news website with Avery's photographs prominently displayed. The contrast was stark. Teenage boys tormenting a frightened cub, a tiny girl standing up to them, and finally, the extraordinary moment between Lily and the mother bear. Even Jacob fell silent, finally confronting the visual evidence of his actions through the lens of public perception. The ranger station was already surrounded by media vans when Eleanor arrived with Lily shortly before noon. True to his word, Ranger Wilkins had arranged for them to enter through a staff door, avoiding the gathered press. Avery Johnson met them in a small conference room, her camera hanging around her neck. Thank you for coming, she said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. You remember me from yesterday? I was the lady taking pictures at the park. Lily nodded, regarding Avery with curious eyes. Did you take pictures of the baby bear? I did. Very special pictures that are helping people understand what happened. Avery looked up at Eleanor. The Rangers have asked to use some of my photographs during the press conference. I wanted your approval before agreeing, especially for any images that clearly show Lily. Eleanor appreciated the consideration. Can I see which ones you're planning to use? Avery nodded, opening her laptop to display a carefully curated sequence of images. She had selected shots that told the story honestly but protected Lily's dignity. No images of her crying or in obvious distress. Nothing that a child might later find embarrassing when old enough to understand the concept of public image. These look appropriate, Eleanor agreed after reviewing them. But I don't want Lily answering questions from reporters. She's too young to understand the implications. Absolutely, Ranger Wilkins said, entering the room with Dr. Chen, the Wildlife Management Director. We've structured the press conference to focus primarily on the wildlife management aspects. We'll explain what happened, address public safety concerns, discuss the status of the bears, and outline next steps. We thought perhaps you might make a brief statement as Lily's mother, but Lily won't need to participate at all. Eleanor nodded, relieved. That seems reasonable. What's going to happen to the bears? Dr. Chen stepped forward. That's one of the key points we'll be addressing. There's been significant public pressure coming from both directions, some demanding the bears be relocated or even euthanized as a precaution, others insisting they be protected as special or significant animals. They shouldn't be hurt, Lily piped up suddenly, her small voice firm. They didn't do anything wrong. The mommy bear was just taking care of her baby. The adults exchanged glances, struck by the simple wisdom in the child's words. That's exactly right, Lily, Dr. Chen said with a smile. And that's why we've decided to leave the bears in their natural habitat. We'll monitor them, of course, but they've shown no predatory interest in humans. In fact, quite the opposite. The mother bear demonstrated remarkable restraint in a situation where most would have expected aggression. Ranger Wilkins checked his watch. It's almost time. Mrs. Morgan, are you comfortable making a brief statement? Nothing prepared, just your perspective as Lily's mother? Eleanor took a deep breath, centering herself. Yes, I can do that. The press conference unfolded with careful orchestration. Ranger Wilkins introduced the key participants, explained the sequence of events using Avery's photographs as visual aids, and addressed the park's safety measures. Dr. Chen followed with a detailed explanation of bear behavior, emphasizing why this particular encounter had defied expectations and what lessons could be learned for future wildlife management. When Eleanor was invited to speak, she approached the microphone with quiet dignity, her hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. Yesterday, my daughter did something that many adults, including myself, might not have had the courage to do. She saw a frightened animal being tormented and decided to help, without calculating risks or consequences. Her action came from a place of pure compassion. She paused, gathering her thoughts. As her mother, I was terrified when I realized what was happening. Every parent's nightmare is seeing their child in danger. But today, I'm not just afraid, I'm also proud. Proud that Lily's first instinct was kindness. Proud that she stood up against something wrong, even though she's only 4 years old. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, who was watching the proceedings with solemn attention. I think we adults can learn something from what happened yesterday, about courage, about compassion, and about respecting the wild creatures with whom we share this world. Thank you. The press erupted with questions, but Ranger Wilkins quickly stepped in, directing the conversation back to wildlife management policies. Eleanor and Lily were escorted back to the private room, their official participation concluded. What none of them could have anticipated was how Eleanor's simple, heartfelt words would resonate far beyond that press conference. Combined with Avery's powerful images, they formed a narrative that would catalyze unexpected change. 3 weeks after the incident at Oak Ridge Park, the Morgan family stood in the airport arrival area, Lily bouncing with excitement as passengers began streaming through the gate. "Where's Daddy? I can't see him," she squealed, standing on tiptoe. Eleanor scanned the crowd until she spotted a familiar tall figure in military fatigues. "There he is, sweetheart." Staff Sergeant David Morgan spotted them at the same moment, his face breaking into a wide smile. He quickened his pace, dropping his duffel bag as he reached them and sweeping Lily into his arms. "There's my brave girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he held her tightly. "I've missed you so much." Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, all her pent-up longing for her father expressed in that fierce hug. "Daddy, did you see the baby bear on TV? Did you see how I helped him?" David's eyes met Eleanor's over their daughter's head, sharing a moment of parental understanding. "I sure did. You were very brave. But no more bear rescues while I'm away, okay? You nearly gave your old dad a heart attack." He set Lily down gently and pulled Eleanor into an embrace, kissing her softly. "And you," he murmured against her hair, "handling all of this on your own. You're incredible." "Not entirely on my own," Eleanor replied. "We've had some unexpected allies." Those allies had emerged in surprising ways over the past weeks. Avery Johnson had become a friend and advocate, using her platform as a wildlife photographer to share the accurate story of what had happened. Her photographs had been published in national magazines and featured in a special exhibition at the local Natural History Museum titled Compassion Across Species. Perhaps more surprisingly, Michael Hayes had become an unlikely champion for the cause that had spontaneously formed around the incident. Unlike his friends, Michael had immediately taken responsibility for his actions. He had personally apologized to the Morgan family, enrolled in the wildlife conservation program offered as an alternative to prosecution, and become an outspoken advocate for strengthening wildlife protection laws. The experience had transformed him, awakening a passion for environmental justice that his park ranger grandfather had always hoped to see. Michael had even started a youth education program, visiting elementary schools to teach children about respecting wildlife and standing up against bullying in all its forms. "There's actually something happening this afternoon that I think we should attend," Eleanor told David as they drove home from the airport. "The state legislature is holding a public hearing on the proposed Lily's Law. Michael will be testifying, and he asked if we'd come for support." David raised an eyebrow. "Lily's Law? They named a law after our daughter?" Eleanor nodded. "It was proposed by Senator Martinez after the incident went viral. It would strengthen penalties for wildlife harassment and establish educational programs in schools about wildlife conservation." The senator's office reached out about potentially having Lily attend the hearing as a symbolic figure, but I wanted to discuss it with you first. David considered this, watching his daughter in the rearview mirror as she contentedly pointed out familiar landmarks to her stuffed bear, Mr. Buttons. How much attention has all this brought to Lily? Has it been overwhelming for her? "Surprisingly, not as much as I feared," Eleanor replied. "Avery has been amazing at helping manage the media interest, and the Rangers have been protective. Lily knows she did something special, but to her, it was simply helping a baby bear. She doesn't fully understand the wider impact." "And what about the bears?" David asked. "Any further sightings?" Eleanor smiled. "They've been spotted occasionally by wildlife cameras the Rangers set up, but they've stayed deep in the forest, away from the park. The cub is growing quickly. The rangers say he's thriving. The state capitol building was impressive with its classical architecture and soaring dome. Inside the hearing room, Michael Hayes fidgeted nervously with his prepared statement, dressed in a suit that seemed slightly too large for his lanky teenage frame. When he spotted the Morgan family entering, he stood and approached them, anxiety evident in his posture. "You came," he said, relief clear in his voice. "Thank you, I wasn't sure." David extended his hand. "Staff Sergeant David Morgan, I understand you've been making amends in a meaningful way. That takes character." Michael shook his hand firmly, standing a little straighter at the acknowledgement. "I'm trying, sir. What happened that day, it changed how I see things. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make something good come from it." Lily, who had been partially hiding behind her mother's legs, peered up at Michael with curious eyes. "Are you still friends with the mean boys?" she asked directly, with the unfiltered honesty of a child. Michael crouched down to her level, his expression serious. "No, I'm not. I realized that real friends don't ask you to do bad things. They help you be a better person instead." Lily nodded, accepting this wisdom with the gravity of a judge approving a sound argument. Then, with the quick forgiveness that comes naturally to children, she held out Mr. Buttons for Michael to shake hands with, a gesture of acceptance that brought unexpected tears to the teenager's eyes. The hearing room filled quickly. Senator Martinez, a formidable woman in her 50s with a reputation for environmental advocacy, called the session to order. Representatives from wildlife conservation organizations, park management, educational institutions, and law enforcement were all present to testify about the proposed legislation. Avery Johnson arrived just as the proceedings began, slipping into a seat beside Eleanor with an apologetic smile. "Sorry I'm late. Last-minute call from National Geographic. They want to feature the bear photograph in their annual issue." The hearing proceeded with the measured pace of legislative work. Experts presented statistics on wildlife harassment incidents, the psychological profiles of animal abusers, the correlation between animal cruelty and other forms of violence, and the economic value of wildlife tourism to the state. The proposed law was dissected, clause by clause, with arguments for strengthening some portions and modifying others. When Michael was called to testify, he approached the microphone with visible nervousness, but spoke with clear conviction. "My name is Michael Hayes. I'm 17 years old, and I was one of the teenagers involved in harassing the bear cub at Oak Ridge Park 3 weeks ago." His voice wavered slightly, but he continued, "I'm here to support Lily's law, because I've experienced firsthand how inadequate our current approach is." He described how easily the incident had begun. Boredom, peer pressure, the thoughtless cruelty that can emerge when boundaries aren't clear and consequences seem distant. He explained how the existing penalties had been abstract concepts to him before, but how the educational component of his community service had transformed his understanding. If we had learned about wildlife harassment in school, if we had understood the legal and ethical implications, things might have been different that day, he said. What we need isn't just punishment after the fact. We need education before harm occurs. Michael turned slightly, gesturing toward Lily and her family. "It took a 4-year-old girl to show me what courage and compassion really look like. We shouldn't need children to teach us these lessons. We should be teaching them ourselves, building these values into our education system and our laws." Senator Martinez thanked Michael for his testimony, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Hayes, it takes significant courage to come forward as you have done. Your perspective is valuable precisely because you've been on both sides of this issue." As the hearing continued, Lily grew restless, as any 4-year-old would during long legal proceedings. Eleanor was just considering taking her outside for a break when the chamber doors opened and a surprise visitor entered. Dr. Harriet Chen, the wildlife management director who had been skeptical about the bear's behavior at the initial press conference, walked purposefully to the witness table. When called upon, she presented new evidence that silenced the room. Our department has been monitoring the bear and her cub using non-invasive tracking methods, she explained. We've observed something remarkable that I feel compelled to share today, as it bears directly on the spirit of the proposed legislation. Dr. Chen presented a series of images from wildlife cameras showing the mother bear and her now larger cub in various locations throughout the forest. The final image, displayed on the chamber's presentation screen, showed the bears at the very edge of the forest, overlooking Oak Ridge Park from a safe distance. This image was captured yesterday at dusk, Dr. Chen explained. The bears approached the forest edge, observed the park briefly, and then retreated deeper into the woods. They've repeated this behavior 7 times in the past 3 weeks, always maintaining a safe distance, never attempting to enter the park or approach humans. She turned to face the committee directly. As a scientist, I'm reluctant to anthropomorphize animal behavior, but as a field researcher with 20 years of experience, I must acknowledge that these bears are displaying unusual patterns that suggest recognition and deliberate avoidance of human spaces, while maintaining what almost appears to be curiosity. Dr. Chen paused, choosing her next words carefully. The incident at Oak Ridge Park demonstrated something profound, that human-wildlife relationships are more complex than we often acknowledge. The proposed legislation recognizes this complexity by emphasizing education and coexistence rather than simply punitive measures. Her testimony shifted the atmosphere in the chamber. What had been a relatively standard legislative hearing suddenly felt imbued with greater significance, as if the law under consideration was not merely a response to a single incident, but a recognition of something deeper about humanity's relationship with the natural world. When the hearing concluded, Senator Martinez approached the Morgan family directly. Thank you for coming today. Your daughter's actions have inspired something important here. We hope to have the legislation ready for a vote within the month. David, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, spoke up. Senator, may I ask what prompted your interest in this particular incident? Wildlife harassment occurs regularly. What made this different? The senator smiled thoughtfully. Staff Sergeant, I've been working on environmental legislation for 15 years. In my experience, laws change for one of 2 reasons, either through crisis or through story. Crisis forces us to react, but story allows us to reflect. Your daughter gave us a story that touched something universal. As they left the Capitol building, reporters gathered outside requested comments. David and Eleanor politely declined, prioritizing Lily's privacy and well-being over the ongoing media interest. But Avery, with her expertise in handling the press, offered a brief statement that captured the essence of what had occurred both that day and in the weeks since the incident. Today, we witnessed how a moment of compassion can catalyze meaningful change, she said, her photographer's eye noting how the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the Capitol steps. What happened at Oak Ridge Park wasn't just about a child and a bear. It was about recognizing our shared responsibility toward all living creatures. That evening, as David tucked Lily into bed for the first time in 6 months, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. Daddy, is the baby bear going to remember me? David sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer truthfully while respecting his daughter's perception of the world. I don't know, sweetheart. Bears remember important things about their lives, especially things that help them survive. I think the cub will remember that a human helped it once, even if it doesn't remember exactly who you are. Lily nodded, accepting this answer. That's okay. I'll remember him. And a lot of other people will remember what you did, David said softly, brushing her hair back from her forehead. You helped change how people think about protecting animals. Because I was brave? Lily asked sleepily, her eyes beginning to close. Because you